Many of us recall our teachers in schools, at least in the US, giving us word minimums on our papers with no explanation as to why we needed 1,000 words. If you're like me, you found creative ways of writing the same things repeatedly, each time exploring fluffier ways to express those ideas. As a result, I, like many others, left the public school system ill equipped to communicate concisely or adequately explore ideas. So, this is an example of ineffective teaching in which no capacity is built. Some students, much more self aware than I was, realized that the minimum word count was a way of invoking thought or delving deeper into a topic. Meanwhile, kids like me toiled and never thought twice about it. Think of the difference it would make if all students knew the importance of the word minimum, that it was an opportunity to explore and expand. That if you could not meet the minimum, you should do more to research or challenge the thoughts you already have. Teaching at its core is not the act of having students do exercises or committing things to memory, though sometimes that is required. It's meant to instill skills and critical thinking. Before teaching, you must ensure that you and your students fully understand the importance of a lesson and what they'll gain from it, or you might end up with unintended results. So who am I? My name is Daniel Clarke. I'm a retired US Navy diver and an L2 from Tucson, Arizona. I spent years teaching American and foreign militaries on how to operate and maintain life support equipment in which their lives relied on. Prior to my naval diving experience, I taught English in Japan, where I developed strategies for clarifying corporate finance to people that often did not share a language with me. I currently train new hires in the operational processes I developed within a TCG-focused tech startup. Effective teaching is a universal skill that every leader, in this case, judge, needs to grasp. Teaching in the world of judging can be very difficult if you don't take the time to develop the required skills and strategies. I'll give an overview of my process, but if you take nothing away from this presentation, know this. You need to find a way to make information or skills seen as valuable, or it's unlikely to be retained by others. Establish importance, and the rest will follow. So while as an instructor in the Navy, I had extreme but clearly defined outcomes to measure the effectiveness of my teaching. When successful, my divers performed the skills correctly, and the gear would operate as intended. If unsuccessful, catastrophe loomed. The stakes are easy to understand, and the students have a vested interest in learning those skills. Maintaining equipment is not particularly exciting work. The diver entering the water in the photo, whose life depends on successful maintenance of the diving equipment, hopes that the maintainer took the lesson seriously. Teaching the importance of concepts central to the JUDGE program are not as easily realized. As a leader in your community, it's imperative that you hone your ability to instill information that is correct and likely to be retained. This presentation will help remind or equip you with a glimpse of information to help you along the way. So before we delve too deep, let's define effective teaching so we're all on the same page. In my own words, effective teaching is imparting skills or information in a format that your audience will likely retain. I say likely because you can't expect 100% success in teaching. It is deceptively complex. Every topic has a different relationship with each student, and it's your responsibility to understand the student, the topic, and how to merge the two. The tools needed to distill information and transfer it to others is vital to the continuation of the JUDGE program. As a disclaimer, a 15-minute presentation is not enough to impart everything you'll need to know to be effective. The session is only meant to be a primer or a refresher, depending on your level of experience. That said, please feel free to reach out to me to discuss this topic further. I'm open to feedback of all types, including critical, and I'd love to talk about this more later. So, why is it important to build capacity in others? Building capacity is instilling skills or information needed to perform or produce something. For judges, it's teaching the skills needed to make events run smoothly, or to inspire equality and fairness, and to build an informed community. So how do we get there? There's no one right answer, but I have found that effectively conveying value will make the rest of the process much easier. In other words, you need to know why you are teaching something, and your audience needs to know why too. What's in it for them, and how can you help? If no one knows the value of the information, it's likely they will not care. So think about a job you had in where you didn't know how your role impacted the organization or the world at large. Or how about a class in which the material seemed abstract or seemingly useless? It'd be really difficult to stay engaged, let alone find motivation to truly comprehend why you should care. So, why is teaching effectively as a judge important? You guys can either type into the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. I'll give you guys about a minute here just to type some stuff in, and then we can discuss it. Give you guys a hint here. So, effective teaching is the single most valuable skill that you can develop in today's professional world. Judges are responsible for mentoring and training other judges, and a team is only as strong as its weakest link. We cannot grow if we're not actively developing judges. Looks like Isaac's got something. I know everybody's sitting around in their PJs, hoping that I wouldn't be interactive. Sorry. So, a judge that communicates or teaches clearly will have more respect from the players and other judges. Yeah, exactly. So Isaac said, I have a lot of people that come to me for mentorship, and the more effectively I can teach them, the more mentees I can take on. That's great. So as judges, especially higher level judges, it's our job to develop the community. And that's, players, other judges. And the more effective we are at doing that, the better the community is as a whole. Cool. All right. So, before you begin preparing a lesson or engaging in the situation, you need to fully understand what it is that needs to be addressed and who the intended audience is. You can observe, ask questions, but you should not engage with a lesson until you have a good idea of what needs to be taught and who you will be teaching. Once you have established your heading, you need to proceed tactfully. A good example of this is approaching a table and trying to answer a question without first understanding the situation. I know I've put my foot in my mouth by doing exactly this, and I'm willing to bet that most of us have as well. So, understanding the audience and the topic are equally important. Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. You need to be able to explain the concepts in a way that your audience will understand, in a way that shows respect and consideration. Make the topic appropriate and in language that your intended audience will resonate with. So, as a judge, you'll often have very limited time with your students, an hour at a conference, a few moments at a table, or the beginning and the end of a competitive event. Because of this restraint, you must be sure of what it is you need to teach and that it's done directly and clearly. This means you have to spend some time thinking about what it is you need to convey, the best time to convey it, and the language or tone that will work best. So, I've broken this down into a few steps, which I think you guys might find useful, at least I do. So, first step is limiting your scope. So, to the most impactful topic. So, whether it's a judge conference or a rules question, effective teaching requires a managed scope. If there's a required explanation that's beyond the immediate topic, make sure that you keep it as brief as necessary. This is particularly important for judge calls. So, let's pretend that you're preparing to teach a new judge some skills. We wouldn't want to approach a person with zero experience with high level jargon and overly specific information. It's likely it won't be absorbed or useful. This works both ways. Knowing your audience allows you to tailor your interaction to the level best suited for them. So, what are some ways that we could prepare to increase our chances of being successful with this brand new judge who's trying to learn the ropes? So, think before we ever develop a lesson or any kind of material, what types of things should we consider? I'll give you guys a few minutes to either unmute yourself or type some stuff in, and then I'm going to start populating over here. Come on, guys. I know you're all L2s and higher. Yep, learn the material yourself. That's a good one. Yep, figure out the common stumbling blocks. Yep, like what kind of problems you ran into while you were learning the material yourself. Yeah, exactly. You need to know where the student falls. So if you're teaching, maybe a younger judge who doesn't really have a lot of life experience, maybe the lesson is going to be different than if you're teaching somebody who's been, an English teacher for 20 years. They probably have some skills that a younger person might not have. Good. So populate some stuff in here. So these are just some ideas that I came up with while thinking through it, and want to talk about a few of these in particular. So um, let's see. So, like Andy said, you want to make sure that you know where the student is coming from. You want to know what they know. You want to ask a lot of questions. And then, like Isaac said, you want to make sure that you read, you make sure that you have the most up-to-date information, that you're not teaching something that's antiquated or no longer useful. But there's some other things in here that may not seem as obvious, like how do you stay on topic, or what do you do when you get off topic? Or what happens if you go to teach somebody and they become aggressive, or they find your teaching effort to be offensive? What do you do in those situations? Just something to think about. So once we know what we're getting into in terms of who we're engaging with, we have a roughly defined scope in which to start. So once we understand the scope and level of information required, we have to do some introspection. I believe this is the most difficult thing for most people to do. You understand the topic, but do you understand it well enough to teach? Do you know how to explain it? Can you understand the perspective of the person or people you're aiming to teach? So this is a good opportunity for us to ask ourselves some questions outside this and then delve into it a little bit deeper. So let's see here. Okay. So if anyone wants to unmute or type, why, in your own words, do you think that self-awareness is required for effective teaching? Yep, that's a great point. If you don't know your own limits, you can do more harm than good. It's kind of like what I was saying a little bit earlier, that if you're not well prepared, you might end up with unintended consequences. You might teach somebody the wrong thing, or worse. Right? So Isaac says, it's important for me to know what I don't know, so that if I'm asked a question, I can answer honestly with I don't know. Let me look into that rather than bluffing answer. Great. Yep, that's a good example, and we'll get into that later. So the next step after a thorough prep phase, which includes all that was mentioned before, you want to implement your plan. Chances are, if you prepared effectively, this part will be the easiest step. There are several judges here that will get more into this part of the process, so I'm only going to glance the topic. So, who can tell me a time where they failed explaining something with an observable or negative unforeseen outcome? And how did you adapt? Now, I know this is a tricky situation, but as we all know as experienced judges, a player can navigate incorrectly but still arrive at the correct board state. The same applies to most things in life. It's important that people understand the how and the why, as it improves the chances of them arriving at the correct outcome in a broader spectrum of situations. All right, let's see what Tobias has. Need some elevator music playing. Let's see. So Tobias says, I once asked a question about trinosphere versus The Phyrexian -5/-5 spell. I think Dismember is the one. I knew the answer, but answered in such a way that the player interpreted me totally wrong. I wandered away from the call because I was a bad judge at the time. And another judge came up to me and was like, "Why did you tell him the wrong answer?" And so we had a discussion about it. It was a pretty horrible explanation. That's all. Okay. Well, yeah, that's a great example, especially with judging in particular, because you can arrive at the right outcome but not get there correctly. And if you don't explain that process correctly, then there's a chance that the player is going to apply that same logic to another situation incorrectly, which happens all the time. I know the majority of the judge questions I get is because they either read it online and misinterpreted it, or another judge told them something and they didn't fully understand. Now, granted, at a table, you don't want to get into all the nitty gritties, but it's a good opportunity at the end of a round to go up and give them some further explanation. That way, they have the tools that they need. Good. So, who can tell me a time where they were successful in teaching a concept and got the anticipated outcome? And now there's a trick to this too. So, how do you check to see if you're successful or the person just got lucky? Yeah, right. Most judge calls. True. Right. Yep. So, how did you know that the players understood? Did you ask for verification? Yep. We do. But what I'm getting at here is the player might say exactly what we said back to them, but did we follow up later and find out if they understood how the rule is being applied throughout the game? Yep. Yep. Asking more questions is really great. And obviously, at the side of a table in the middle of a tournament, like that's not really a great time to delve into it. But you could always follow up later, depending we have time. I know that time is always a precious resource at events. All right. So Isaac says, I usually don't follow up with players unless they've asked me to, since most of them don't actually care that much. Yeah, it also could be that the players don't understand why they should care, or why it's important. They don't know what they don't know. And in the case of rules, most players are completely oblivious to how certain rules apply to other board states or other formats. Things that might actually matter to them. But yeah, and maybe following up with players on rulings is not the most effective use of your time, but maybe following up with a junior judge that you're mentoring is, so that way you can instill some skills or information in them that will be really useful. Definitely. All right, so let's move along here. So example teaching. Example teaching is a nice tool that in many judge-based teaching situations it will be effective. Whether it's teaching rules, player interactions, event management, showing and then having them show you establishes a good foundation for learning. If you'd failed at establishing yourself to your audience as someone who should be teaching, this is an opportunity for you to regain some ground. People listen to people they believe know their stuff. Showing it is the best proof of know how. If you don't have any other teaching arrows in your quiver, learn how to teach by example, and you will have a tool that you can adapt to many situations. So I break this down into steps, which is explain what it is you want to teach, provide a real example that could be acting out the situation or using cards to simulate an interaction, have them explain to you what they learned, ask questions that require them to show if they understand and allow them to ask questions back, and then have them provide you an example, again, acting it out, or perhaps a parallel situation that's in line with the lesson to show that they truly understand what's going on. Example teaching can be direct or indirect. It can be you just setting an example, or it can be you like actively showing somebody how to do something. So, teaching is a skill. It can be learned, it can be practiced, and it can be mastered. And if you want to be effective, you have to practice. So, here are some things to work on. So, practice before you preach, whether it's a one-on-one presentation or you're giving a presentation to a bunch of judges. Practice what you're going to say. You don't need to be perfect, but you need to get more right than just the words you say. So if you're nodding off right now or you're not really engaged, it's because I have not mastered presentation and engagement, but I'm working on it. So engage with the people you want to teach. Hopefully you've already started this by asking them some questions, but keep asking questions to help you both explore the topic. Kindle and nurture discussion. The better you know the people you aim to build capacity in, the more equipped you are. So this one's really important and I've been hammering it on a lot, but make it interesting by making the lesson about them. After all, people are only interested in themselves for the most part. I mean, not only, but mostly. The more you can make the lesson about them and the things they find important, the more likely you'll be successful in teaching. Ask for anecdotes and look for opportunities to tie the topic into things they understand or have experience with. This aspect may seem obscure, but you can find common ground in anything. And for us, the low-hanging fruit is the game of Magic. We all love the game, so find parallels to the lesson and go from there. There's no limit to how you adapt the lesson as long as it makes sense and it's effective. If you have a good imagination, this will come easily. So next is learning to connect with a broad spectrum of people. If you truly want to connect, spend time experiencing life with people that you would never normally interact with. Try new things and spend time with people that are as different from you as you can imagine. Exit your comfort zone, and you will learn more about life than any other lesson can teach you. You can't be a great teacher if you're not constantly learning yourself. Make resources available. So make sure that your audience has access to the information discussed and the resources needed to be successful. We are developing people by teaching them. Ensuring success goes beyond the act of explaining. If possible, make sure they have a way to reach out to you for further clarification. Even better, follow up yourself. All right. And kind of like what Isaac was saying, you gotta let go of your ego. So you can't be afraid to say, I don't know. Hey-oh, there it is. So let's give it a try here. So if somebody was asking you a question you don't know, you should practice saying, I don't know. You know, it's okay. But there's other ways to word this that come across with a little bit more class than just throwing up your arms and saying, I don't know. So you could say things like, that's a great question. I'm going to look into that and get back to you. And make sure you write the question down. Or does anyone else know the answer to that question? Or what do you think the answer is? And if you have time, say something like, let's find out right now, and go look it up, or go ask some questions. So letting go of your ego will allow you to learn more fully, because I can guarantee there's no topic that anybody knows perfectly. So accepting that early on will make you a much more effective leader and teacher. The next step is obviously developing yourself, and this is the majority of your work in becoming an effective teacher. Let's see here. Yeah, so you want to develop yourself and/or treat yourself. One and the same. So the first thing you can do if you want to become a better teacher or improve yourself is to read. Reading is imperative to the betterment of every individual and indicative of a worthy leader. No matter what it is you want to get better at or understand more deeply, you should always have some books lined up to help you get there. So I'd like to go over a short list here of books that I've read that I think will be helpful for you guys if you haven't already read them. So writing concisely with strong and white elements of style. So modern education continually asks you to write more, but when we get to the real world, you need to be able to communicate as clearly as possible with as few words needed. This is a good place to start. Find the most explicit form of describing what it is you need to communicate. And once you have this, you can adapt the language to your audience. Using fewer words is far more difficult and requires a lot more thought than adding fluff. This in turn will refine your understanding and allow you to craft language best suited for your audience. Developing memory skills with Moonwalking with Einstein. So rote memorization is not effective learning in itself, but fostering a healthy memory is imperative to good learning. Whether you need more tools to learn new things yourself or some tips in aiding those you seek to help, this pop sci book is a fun way to improve. You'll learn things like anchoring, mnemonics, alliteration. You'll learn that things that are more offensive, the better. Your brain holds on to things that are absurd, odd, or dangerous, so make your mnemonics weird. Chunking, like tying topics together. So, how do you think we learn so many new Magic the Gathering cards so quickly? We chunk them to the memories of other similar cards. This can be expanded to anything. One of my favorite books of all time is Thinking Fast and Slow. It's Behavioral Economics by a Nobel laureate, Daniel Kahneman. And it basically ties into how people learn and what's important to them and how that will vastly improve your ability to effectively transfer abilities. So think of this as like looking behind the curtain of the human mind and tactfully constructing lessons that make remembering and acting easier. And the most fun for last is the Checklist Manifesto. This one resonates with me personally because it's derived from military lessons, particularly in flight. But it's breaking down skills into smaller pieces that makes it easier to understand. So these can be big blocks or very detailed steps. Usually it's best to start with more detailed and work your way up to block checklists. So checklists remove the weakest link of the process, which is the human memory. We get to externalize everything. So let's make a checklist for something judges do on a regular basis that we might need to instill into a new judge. For example, how do we take a judge call? What's the very first thing that we do? Right? So it's this is just something I worked together, and it's obviously could be better, but we greet the players, right? And then after that, maybe we bend down and so that we're at table level, so that way we're not towering over them. And maybe we ask the player that called the judge to explain the situation and then ask their question, and so on and so forth. Now, we all know this because we've done it a million times, but a new judge may not. And giving them something like this will have, to keep in their pocket, and they can pull out anytime they might need it, so they can remember the steps and go through them. And what will happen is they'll get a more uniform output, a more uniform product. And that way players will get a better experience. So once that judge has kind of evolved and they're more comfortable with all of the smaller nitty-gritty steps, maybe they just keep this in their pocket and they don't need everything broken down as detailed, but it remembers, I got to make sure that I greet them. That's the first thing. And then, well, you know what? I always forget to investigate before I try to answer the question, so I'm going to do that next. And then, my biggest flaw is that I always forget to, add a time extension or enter it, into the computer. So, it just gives them the big three that they need to remember to make sure that they're consistent. And this is like a really great learning tool because they don't have to try and memorize everything, and they can just give themselves little tiny tools to assist them along the way. So the next one that I might mention before I'm out of time here is practice. And now I've talked about this before, but I want to go a little bit deeper into this. So teaching effectively, like anything else, requires practice. So this is not just practicing in your room, but actively seeking out opportunities to become a more effective teacher. This could be like volunteering with something like Big Brothers Big Sisters, or becoming a safety volunteer for a nonprofit, or maybe at your work there's some work-related training that you could be giving that will make you a better teacher because it will give you more experience and you'll have more tools to draw on. Next is finding a mentor. Being a great teacher means being a student in perpetuity. You can always find people more experienced or more skilled in some way. Seeking them out and asking for candid feedback is a powerful way to make drastic improvements in a shorter time frame. The catch is that you must be willing to take critical feedback. Your ego must sit on the sidelines. The next one is mirroring. So not all of us have access to a mentor or have the time to read on a regular basis. So mirroring has been proven to help people emulate the skills they hope to improve. So mirroring is the act of watching something done and then attempting it yourself. This can be like watching online videos or people performing in a way that you hope to perform as well. Let's see here. So expanding your knowledge. So this is not just reading more on the topic that you want to become more familiar with, in this case teaching, but it's the act of seeking information that's tangential to your base skill. So teaching is a huge topic and on its own, but understanding things like human behavior, psychology, active listening, concise writing, these can have a deep impact on your ability to teach. And lastly, taking notes. So understanding that the human memory is flawed. it can be selective, inaccurate, and it can be imprinted on. Your memories can change based on the experiences you have after a memory is made. So, writing is an external form of memory, and when it's used correctly, it creates a clear image of your interpretation of information in that moment. So, writing things down provides a baseline for growth and development, and it's the surest way to get better at doing everything. And before I wrap up, does anybody have any questions or anything that they want to add?